welcome to another episode of Faith Talk, where we talk all things theology, religion, and life's tough questions. I'm Oliver, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host Payton.
As always.
As always.
Yes, as always.
And today we're joined yet again by Pastor Rome.
Yes, we're finishing it, finally.
Yeah.
Part 2.
We started this conversation. It's the second episode of this podcast.
Yeah.
And now we're finally back. It's changed a lot.
Yeah.
Like, you can actually see us now. As you can see.
As you can see. But the last time we had Pastor Rome on, we were in a little booth.
Like
3
a
guys
closet.
I remember that.
surrounded one mic.
You kept hitting the mic, remember?
Yeah.
I did.
Because you were so cramped in there. Yeah. Now we've got a whole setup here with video and everything.
A poster and everything.
Yeah.
It's
Post and
crazy.
everything. Yeah. I mean, did you guys even have the logo?
We did have the logo, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, this is awesome that, your ministry is growing.
It is. It is. Praise God.
It's exciting too.
So yeah, I mean, we're getting into, I believe the title of the first part was The History of Christian Thought. And we're kind of going to jump back onto that bandwagon since there's so much to talk about.
Yeah, I guess, the question would be how is it that Christianity is still around today?
After 2,000 years. It's
Yeah,
still here.
and it goes back to haven't we, like what we've done with Zeus and Marduk, right?
Yeah.
Reason these guys out of education today.
Yeah.
But you go to the library today, like the Congress, and quoting, I forget the philosopher who said it. He says that when you go to the libraries, it's like the largest percentage of the topics that those books are about.
Right.
God, right? And not just any God in particular. It's the God of the Bible. And why is it that we're still talking about the God of the Bible today? Why is the God of the Bible still, irrelevant?
Why is he relevant?
Why is he still relevant today? I was just listening to one podcast just recently as well, and it had, 2 guys arguing over the nature of God. And, both of them approaching, the God of the Bible differently. And so I'm thinking after all these years, after the Age of Enlightenment, right? The Renaissance, the Age of Enlightenment, the modern and postmodern, and here we are in the metamodernism world, we're still talking about him.
Yep.
He hasn't gone anywhere. And so I guess, the last time we were talking about Christianity stepping, into the scene with Jesus, right? Jesus sends his followers into the world. Whereas, and if you look into the Old Testament, one of the biggest problems that that Israel had was that they were very exclusive.
Right.
Right. For them, it was like the Gentile world was
The unclean Gentiles over there can't come near
right.
us.
It's like no.
Right.
And they lost sight of the fact that God had called them to reflect His character to all the nations. We see this in Isaiah chapter 1. We see this in Jonah going over to the Gentiles, the Nineveh, to give the gospel. Right. All throughout Scripture, you see God using Israel, as a way to reach the other nations. And Jesus, the Great Commission in Matthew chapter 28, finally tells his disciples, go into the world and take the good news. And so they go into the world at a crucial time. It's the Hellenistic world that they were entering into. And the Hellenistic world was in a skeptical impasse at the time. And at the time, Stoicism and Epicureanism was on the rise. And Stoicism and Epicureanism was really a reaction to the debate between Plato and Aristotle. Plato was he was the great he had a strong ontology, right? He's the great rationalist. And then you have Aristotle, who was the great. He had a strong epistemology, and he's the great empiricist. And so they're having this debate, right, over who's got it right. Plato is saying it's the ideal versus the receptacle. And then you got Aristotle, who says, that can easily be, defined through actuality and potentiality. And so whenever you hear two great ideas, you're like, shoot, they both sound right. They're trying to tackle some of the toughest questions of life. And when they couldn't figure out what the right answer was, it was like, well, we don't care anymore.
You just give up.
You give up.
You become indifferent.
Yeah, it's like nobody has the right answer.
Who cares anymore?
Who cares now?
Yes, exactly.
And the attitude towards that is like, it's like, it doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah, and that's where Stoicism and
Stoicism and
more nihilism almost, right? When you say nobody cares anymore.
Yeah, but it's I would say it's more like it's more existential.
Sure.
Like Stoicism, it's like for both the Stoic and the Epicurean, they have to make sense of the absurdity of life.
Right.
It's like, okay, so we haven't figured out, what the main question of life is like, it's the existential question. It's like, what is the meaning of life?
42.
42. Yes, 42. After all these years. That's it.
Guys. We found
it, guys. It's 42. But, but that's the thing, right? They couldn't figure it out. And so Stoicism says, right, let's try and think right now, okay? We've got to use our minds, right? We've got to focus, and I think the biggest problem we have is we're too emotional. We're too emotional.
Right.
We're gonna start using our minds. We got to start being, it's I heard it said this way: it's I over E, intelligence over emotions, not E over I, right? And then you got Epicureanism, and I heard this one Adventist, right? This one Adventist, he did a sermon and he talked about, Epicurean was like this pagan philosopher who was all about pleasure. Yeah. He indulged in sex. He indulged in all sorts of food. That's not who Epicurean is.
Yeah.
And I guess sometimes when people, hear what another person says about another philosopher, and then they think, they're all philosophers from the ancient world are all evil. Yeah. Epicurean was against any form of pleasure that brought about pain. It's the hedonistic paradox. Yeah. He said, you got to be careful with the type of food that you eat, because it could bring about diseases.
Yeah.
He talked about not engaging in sex because it brings about all sorts of issues, emotional issues. And he said that if anything, you should rethink what pleasure is.
Yeah.
And so, if anything, he was more a monk. He was more a monk. When he talked about pursuing pleasure, believe me, it's got nothing to do with what people think pleasure is today.
It's interesting because these ideas that we're talking about here seep into the modern world without us even realizing it. We've all seen Batman versus Superman, right?
Right.
That movie. I didn't particularly like that movie. That's neither here nor there, though, because in that movie, Lex Luthor says, I learned a long time ago that if God is all-powerful, he cannot be all good. And if he's all good, he cannot be all-powerful.
Right.
And he's quoting Epicurus.
Yes.
Of course, he's plagiarizing because he doesn't get any credit. But it's in there. And it seeps into our culture today without us even seeing it. And nobody would know. You watch that movie, you come out of the theater, no idea that you just heard philosophy from this guy. You don't even know his name, but it's there.
And it's still there today. There's a story that D.L. Moody says he's teaching in a class, and he talks about the world that he was living in. He was living in a world of of apathy and and ignorance. Mm-hmm. And he said he turned around to the student and he says, "Do you agree that we're in an age of apathy and ignorance?" And the kid says, "I don't know, and I don't care." And it's really what Epicurean was he was really a sign of his times.
Sure.
He knew that people hadn't worked it out, but we have to deal with life, right? And so he tried to make sense of life. And so Stoicism was really more popular in the Roman world than it was anywhere else. It was more popular to the Romans than it was to the Greeks. So Paul, in Acts chapter 17, turns up, into the scene and brings Christianity, right? And he engages both the Stoics and the Epicureans. Yeah. And so the Christians, they brought a synthesis, right? And in 1 John chapter 1, verse 1, John testifies that which we have heard about,
right.
that was the ontology that Plato was talking about. He says, has come.
Yeah.
And we had touched him.
We beheld him.
We beheld him. Excuse me. That was that's what Aristotle was looking for. The Christian synthesis ended that skepticism, and it quickly transformed the Roman Empire. The world was never the same again.
Yeah.
And the world hasn't been the same since Jesus steps into the world. Yeah. Every philosophy, every thought from that moment onwards had to deal with the question of what do we do with Jesus?
Yep. Yep.
And so you got all these great minds and all these great thinkers that would come up after that. You got like Augustine, right? Yep. And you've got Anselm. These guys harnessed the Platonic, idea to convey this Christian message because, they were emerging out of this Hellenistic world. So they were using what was familiar to the West at the time.
Right.
And so what was familiar to the West was, the ideas of Plato and Aristotle. More Plato at the time than it was Aristotle. Because remember, Plato was the great rationalist. And a lot of people who don't know what rationalism is, a lot of people think that rationalism is the opposite of spirituality.
Yeah.
It's not. Back then, rationalism was like spirituality. Rationalism was on the opposite side of the spectrum from science.
Yeah.
Which
is ironic, given what we see today.
Exactly. Aristotle was arguing for a scientific worldview. Plato was arguing for the opposite because he believed that the abstractions were more powerful than the object. He would say, who was it? Jordan Peterson in his book Maps of Meaning said that Sigmund Freud and Shakespeare were both looking to achieve the same thing. And I'm thinking, one wrote poetry and stories, and they were fictitious.
Yeah.
The other one was a scientist and a psychologist. How are they the same? You see, one was talking about the matter of life, as in matter.
Yeah.
The other one was talking about what matters, what matters in life. And it's like you go and watch Hamlet, and you think about the tragedy in Hamlet, the tragedy of Much Ado About Nothing, and Romeo and Juliet. No one would actually, in their right mind, walk away and say that those stories aren't true.
Sure.
There's something deep about those stories on a rational level.
Yeah.
And even when we discuss morals and ethics, you discuss it on a rational level, not a scientific, not from an empiricist level, because science only talks about the hows of life.
Yeah. It never talks about the why.
It does not talk about the why.
When you say like those stories are true, I guess it means what you mean by true. Because speaking of Jordan Peterson, people ask him all the time. They're trying to pin him in a box of whether he's a Christian, what he is. And one time I remember hearing him say, well, in that sense, kind of the sense you just described, the Bible is true. And he said it's, quote, even more than true in that sense.
Oh, yeah.
So people hear that and they try to pin him into the box of, oh, he's a Christian. But what he means by that and his belief system is that the Bible describes human nature.
Yes.
Essentially in a way. And I think even we did an episode one time about Star Wars and faith. Yeah. Where we talked about like the parallels of
profound.
In that sense you could say, oh, Star Wars has some truth to it because it talks about the human condition. And I know like you may be a bigger Star Wars fan than me at this point. I gotta say you may have toppled me. So
But it's like every story has some truth to it if you really look at it.
Well, yeah.
Every movie, you throw a rock, hit one, there's morals behind it.
Yeah.
There's truth in there somewhere. Sesame Street has truth to it.
Dude,
you know?
no atheist goes to watch a Marvel movie and walks out saying, I don't like it because it's not realistic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, nobody walks out of these movies saying, prove to me that people can fly. Nobody cares when you're watching Marvel.
Yeah.
Oh, prove to me that there are other universes.
They don't care.
They don't care because they're so consumed in the story and they can't wait for the next one. They're like watching the Netflix, series of other ones to try and make sense of what they watched. It's like, it's a religion in itself.
Yeah.
And I think that Christianity, when it came in to the Hellenistic world, it was easily received because what they had already known about their gods, Jesus gave them something more real.
Yeah, that's interesting because you mentioned Zeus earlier, towards the beginning, and then you mentioned the Marvel movies.
Yep.
And in that recent, we were talking about this the other day, the new Thor: Love and Thunder movie. Zeus shows up in there.
Yep.
But what's interesting is that they play him as a joke, right?
Yep.
And they play all these gods in this Thor movie as a joke. Christianity is never portrayed in like a movie like that as a joke.
Yep.
There's a distinct difference we see that Christianity's lasted this 2,000 years and people still take it seriously. But nobody really takes Zeus seriously anymore. He's a joke. Nobody believes or worships Zeus.
Right.
But we still believe and worship Christianity on a very large scale.
Yes.
And that's that Christian synthesis or Jesus stepping on the scene that changed things.
That scene where you see Thor in the middle, surrounded by all these gods, that's how you would imagine Jesus in this time.
Yeah.
He's like the one that is going to bring people's minds back to the existence of God, the real God.
The real God.
The real God. And so everyone else, like, I imagine Acts chapter 17 when Paul enters the scene and he sees all these gods and only one of them was the one that he would use to bring truth from. And he said, Agnostos Theos. It's the unknown God. This is the God that I'm going to talk to you about. And so you look at the rise of Christianity and how Christianity rose during that time. They didn't rise through the conquest of soldiers that marched into Rome and conquered Rome through the sword and then gave them religion. No, they conquered Rome through the word and the word alone. It wasn't, and the reason I particularly point that out is because when you think about the spread of Islam,
it was by the sword.
It was by the sword, which is why most historians would refer to Islam as more of an empire than a faith. The spread of the Moorish in the north into Spain through the sword, right? And then the spread of like the Turks into Europe, in the West, all of it done by the sword. And once they conquered them, they gave them, they gave them the Quran, Islam. And so the miracle that Christianity did that in such a small time, and then on top of that, you got now like this belief in God, but you saw also corruption in that time. People lost what true Christianity was, and I put it this way: Christianity became the persecutor. They were once the persecuted, and then they became the persecutor. They were doing a lot of strange things back then. They changed the idea of church, and this is why my heart goes out to many of the atheists that are out there. Their idea of Christianity is given to them through history, not the right history, right? I always try and take them back to the person of Jesus because they always take us back to the medieval period. The medieval synthesis is not the same as the Christian synthesis, what the medieval church did. And I know that even the Catholic Church, even now, have some regrets of the things that they did back then. You got the Inquisitions, you've got slavery that came up afterwards. But like, here's the thing, right? The Crusades as well. There's blood on Christians' hands. The first ones to call out Christianity was Christianity. The Christians called them out first.
Yeah.
I had somebody, talk to me recently saying that about the sermon that I preached the other week, and they said, you talked about these nihilists and these existentialists, philosophers. They were really calling out Christianity for their atrocities. Mm-hmm. And I said, yep. But before they called out Christianity was already calling them out, because, Jesus had an answer to the chaos of the world, and it was the church. Yeah. It wasn't humanism.
No.
Right? It wasn't any political party. No. Nothing is rising up after the church. And so when they were throwing the church out, they were throwing out the very thing that Jesus gave us to deal with the issues of the world. Jesus was going to work through his church. But the church lost its identity in that period, to the point where you can actually say that there's this counterfeit church that became known as the church. And the church was, the true church at the time was being persecuted. Like, you got the Waldenses, right? Who were still holding true to what the Bible was saying and were being persecuted by the church. It's like, what is going on here? And so the rise of Islam was also because there was corruption in the church. There was division in the church. Sure. If you look around the time in which, in the 7th century, when Islam, was rising up, there was, issues between, the church in the East and the West. They had what they call, iconoclasticism. The church was divided over the issue of iconoclasticism, which is, should there be images in the church or not? Right. Should we have pictures, sculptures? Yeah. Should we do that?
Like
That's
the stained glass windows that you see.
Like anything with images. Yeah. Islam came around and says, no, you can't. And because the church was divided on it, those who said that you shouldn't have, they became Islamic a lot easier. Yeah. And you see that happening in the civil rights movement as well. Mm-hmm. Many people went to Islam because of the misrepresentation of God. Yeah. You got people that were saying, like, Christianity is a white religion.
Even though none of the founders were white.
Right. They were like, it's a white religion. Yeah. And so many of them became, Islam. Many of the black Americans here became Islam because of what they saw Christianity to be.
A misrepresentation.
The misrepresentation, right? And so going back to that time, a lot of people were leaving the church. And also, because the Platonic approach was so popular in the church, the rise of Islam, when they attacked the church, they used Aristotle. They used Aristotle to question the church's theology, which is funny because they started bringing back the debate between Plato and Aristotle. Remember, Plato ended skepticism before his time, right? There was skepticism before Plato, which brought about cynicism and sophism. And then Plato ended, the debate by, bringing in his synthesis. And everything seems to be okay until...
And then they revive it.
And then Aristotle comes into the scene. And so the battle between Aristotle and Plato. And so that battle was revived when Islam comes in and they harness the Aristotelian, philosophy in, their debate with Christianity. And so one of the guys that used the Aristotelian argument to help stir the church back in the right direction was Thomas Aquinas. Mm-hmm. And so Thomas Aquinas comes into the scene. And so, again, it's the church will always check the church. And so the Reformation comes around as the church, trying to make sure that the church is going into the right direction. Yeah. Martin Luther, right? He wasn't the very first reformer. There were other reformers before him that were talking about the church. These reformers were trying to correct the church's corruption. And when they tried to do that, they were burnt at the stake. Yeah. John Huss was one of those guys. and he was trying to correct the church at the time, and they burnt him, right? Because he was trying to translate the Bible, and when he tried to do that, they burnt him at the stake, and he says, "You're roasting a goose, but a swan will rise."
Well, it's like they say, the blood of martyrs is seed.
Yeah.
And because you compared Christianity's spread to Islam's spread, and how
Right.
Islam was spread by the sword.
Yes.
In a sense, Christianity was spread by the sword, but in the opposite way.
The opposite,
As
yeah.
in the sword being used against Christianity was actually part of what spread it.
Yes.
And that's a huge distinction.
Exactly.
Force versus persecution.
Exactly. And that's why whenever somebody talks about, the dichotomy between Christianity and science, and they talk about pro-science, it's like Christians were the first scientists, in that regard, in that tradition. It was Copernicus, a Polish priest. Like all these Christians, that came together that caused the scientific revolution. Isaac Newton was Christian, so it's like I don't buy into the whole dichotomy between science and religion itself. And so, anyways, the Reformation was a response to the corruption of the church. Martin Luther could no longer believe this stuff, and it was really because Martin Luther, the story has it that he was reading, he was writing a commentary on his first commentary was on Psalm, the commentary on Psalm. His second commentary was on Romans. And in Romans chapter 1, I think it's verse 16 and 17, he was stuck on those two verses. Because remember, he's a Catholic, right?
Yeah.
Raised in the Catholic tradition. And it says you shouldn't be ashamed of the gospel in Romans chapter 1. It's the revelation of the righteousness of God. He was like, wait, hold on. Let me give you an example. You have a cookie jar, right? And your mother says you're not allowed to touch the cookies in the cookie jar. And so she turns off the lights. Everyone's going to sleep. At what time would you go and put your hand in the cookie jar? You'd never do it in the day, right?
No. You gotta be sneaky about it.
You gotta be sneaky about it, right? And the whole expression, the hand in the cookie jar, right?
Yeah.
Is, the kid does it at night, not in the day. And the thing is, you will continue to have the hand in the cookie jar so long as it's night. But as soon as your mother switches on the light, you're like caught red-handed, right? And you're like, oh my goodness. You pause, and your ways have been brought into the light. There's nothing like boastful about that. It's shameful.
No.
And so for Luther, he was like, how is it that you should be very ashamed? You should be very ashamed. But he says that, God's goodness is seen in this gospel, the light. It's like what is supposed to be embarrassing. Remember when Paul says, we shouldn't boast in the good things. We should boast in our infirmities. It's like a paradox.
It is, yeah.
It's like a paradox. It's like, why should I boast in my weaknesses? It's like somebody losing a game. And this in fact happened, right? In 97, the All Blacks, #1 rugby team in the world, they played Italy. And they were smashing Italy. Like they were in going into the hundreds. Italy was on 0. And in the last 10 minutes of the game, Italy gets a try. And there's a celebration. The game is not over, but they were celebrating, weeping on the field. And I'm like, what is going on here? You'd think that the Italians had won the game. And then you realize it's the very first try that the Italians have got on the All Blacks since the history of the game. And so they were celebrating that one try, and I was like, this is crazy. Like Paul was told to celebrate, like glory in your weaknesses. Celebrate your infirmities. Like glory in that. Don't glory in goodness, because that's Jesus. right? And so Luther wrestled with that.
Yeah.
He said, no, from what I know of the church, right, there's such a thing as purgatory,
Yeah.
right? No one is good enough. You have to have good works to be good enough. And if you have good works, then you'd be a saint. But because you're not a saint, you're going to purgatory.
Yeah, just throw out Ephesians 2:8-9. Ignore that part, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And so Luther saw there's something not right here. And it wasn't until, Textile, this one priest who was sent by Pope Leo X to go into Germany to sell indulgences. And the selling of indulgences was so that they could renovate the St. Peter's Basilica. And it was like you sold these indulgences. And for anyone who's tuning in who don't know what indulgences are, the Catholic Church still has it today. The saints' good works, right? Their good works would overflow.
It's funny because Oliver and I in grade school and in middle school, in the Adventist system, you learn a lot about the Reformation. At least when we were in it, I think the curriculum may have changed, but we've learned a lot about like the Reformation and indulgences.
In 7th grade.
Our 7th grade teacher was particularly passionate about this stuff, so
Right.
we heard about it a lot.
We wrote a 5-page essay on the Reformation.
We actually wrote a longer essay too. I think it was our 8th grade year with the same teacher. What was it, like 20 pages? Or
20
something
pages,
on the
right?
Reformation, yeah.
Wow.
And so when you say indulgences, it just brings us back to like the 7th grade year.
Yeah, well, all the good works of the saints
Yeah,
that overflows.
overflow like this.
Yeah, like let's just say that cup is all that's required by God in order for you to make it into heaven. The overflow goes into this treasury box.
And then we sell it.
Yep.
And we sell that, right? And that's the indulgences. And so Luther, who hears about that in Wittenberg, he's like, this is wrong. And he says, I got some questions I want to ask. And he put together a document, and they were more like propositions. And his propositions came in the form of 95
Theses, yeah.
the theses, right? And he put it on a board on the church in Wittenberg, right? And it's a notice board. It's not the only thing that was on there. These preachers that would go out there and say, it was the only
you
thing.
picture it like it's on the door, and it's
Yeah.
the only thing on the door.
Only thing on the. It wasn't noticeable.
Yeah.
He put it up there, and that was it. He didn't have. Luther had no idea what that thing was going to cause. Luther was one of those guys that was just like, oh, this is so silly. Can you guys think for yourselves? Start thinking about some things here. Yeah, I got some questions here. Yeah. And I forget the name of the guy who came around. And this guy was always looking for something new. And, he was working with some friends of his who had just invented the printing press. And so he took a read of the notice board, and he saw these 95 theses, and he said, oh man, these are good questions. And so he takes it to the printing press.
Oh man. Yeah.
And within 2 weeks, what Luther wrote spread throughout Germany.
And he had no
idea what that was going to cause. Yeah. And within 3 months, it was all over Europe. And so, Christianity, the church, is the answer to the corruption. See, when the church had corrupted itself, Christianity was the way in which it's the return to what the Bible,
Correct, yeah.
Let's return to what does the Bible say? And that's why, you got sola scriptura.
Sure.
Right? Yeah. Solus Christus. Sola gratia. Like, it's the return to the Bible, because whenever we drift away from the Bible, that's when the corruption.
Well, yeah, because you're putting your faith and your authority into people.
Yes.
And when you put it into people will let you down. And that's where the idea of sola scriptura comes from. Yeah.
So now, here's the thing. Because the church wasn't catching on, sooner I'll say faster, that out of the, it was already beginning.
Sure.
From as early as the 14th century to the 15th century to the 16th century, they were already beginning to question the church.
Yeah.
And I guess the French Revolution was really a massive fist. It just put a hole in everything. Mm-hmm. And from that hole, you got like all these, Immanuel Kant, and who came out of that, and Hume, right? Like these were the guys that really began to hold Christianity accountable. And Friedrich Nietzsche is one of the most important figures of that time. He was a harsh critic of Christianity. Yeah. And he started questioning Christianity. Like he was ruthless.
Yeah.
If you've ever read his Beyond Good and Evil, yeah, like he smashes Christianity, there. But then he goes on to write the Gay Sciences. Mm-hmm. And in the Gay Sciences, he has this, this figure like Diogenes who would question everything. He has this figure like a Diogenes who goes into the marketplace and he makes this announcement like God is dead.
Yep.
He was really like a prophet. Mm. A lot of people have said that he was like a prophet. He knew what was coming.
Yeah.
It's the 19th century. He said the next century to come is going to be the bloodiest.
And it was. It was.
He says because he knew where it was going. He knew where we were going. We were getting rid of Christianity.
Yep.
We were done with it.
And we didn't have anything to replace it with.
There was nothing to replace it with. So regardless of his idea of the Übermensch, which is what they translated to be a Superman, right? The Superman. Mm-hmm. You're taking Jesus away.
Yeah.
And Jesus was the central figure
of the human race, essentially.
He was the standard of righteousness. Mm-hmm. Now, Nietzsche was saying we had to come up with something else because Jesus is no longer there, right? David Strauss wrote this book called The Life of Jesus in 1835. And he's a theologian, right? And at the end of the book, you were questioning your faith. He was like, yeah. Jesus was a myth.
Yeah.
He was an idea. And the historicity of Jesus is not legitimate. There's another guy by the name of Ludwig Feuerbach. Mm-hmm. And these two figures influenced the person by the name of Karl Marx.
Yeah.
They influenced so many thinkers back then. So you got like guys like Feuerbach and Ludwig. Mm-hmm. Then you got also guys like Karl Marx. I think Charles Darwin.
Those two, yeah, what a combination.
They all came around during this time, and Charles Darwin really put a nail in the coffin.
Yep.
By coming up with his theory of evolution.
Yep. And
then now, Jesus didn't really exist, mm-hmm. and the world didn't come about by, the spoken word of God.
Isn't it interesting how ideas can cause so much damage, and often the people who come up with said ideas don't even see it happen. Like with Karl Marx, for example, he had these ideas of communism, and mm-hmm. it was this utopian vision that he had, and then he's gone, and then down the line, 20 million people are dead, 30 million people are dead, and all these people are dead because of his ideas, and he never even saw it happen.
Yeah.
So, and we have to be careful with the ideas that we bring to the table.
Oh, consequences. Absolutely. I mean, Karl Marx took seriously the ideas of, he took seriously Hegel's idealism, mm-hmm. and he took seriously, Feuerbach's materialism. And so for Karl Marx was against, capitalism. Sure. He was against it. And capitalism, as we know, was put together by the Protestants. Mm-hmm. And he saw the role that Christianity played. And he thought that if he was to get rid of Christianity, there's an opportunity for him to be able to establish a new way of governance.
And he referred to religion as the opioid of the
masses. It's the opium of the masses, right? And so you got these figures, right? They were trying to, because what Nietzsche had said early on, he said, if you take these ideas seriously, chaos, nihilism was going to be the result. And so you got like thinkers like Sartre, Jean-Paul Sartre, and who was trying to answer to this nihilism with the idea of existentialism. And then you got another guy by the name of Albert Camus. And Albert Camus was the great absurdist. Existentialism and absurdism were a response to nihilism. Because, there are a lot of philosophers that people say were existentialists, but they would never have referred to themselves as existentialists,
We classify people.
Yeah. Right? But these existentialists, philosophers, were really trying to get us to make sense of life, and it became more popular in that period of nihilism because of, they said it was more popular in 1945 because it was the end of World War II.
Yeah.
It was like, okay, we were heading towards utopia, so we thought. With the ideas of Charles Darwin, with the ideas of Karl Marx, we thought we were heading towards utopia. Things were going to be better once you got rid of Christianity. Yeah. But as they saw that, hey, look at the amount of bodies. Yeah. Look at how many people have died, right? They no longer believed that we were heading towards this utopia.
Ideas have body counts, right?
Exactly.
And what's fascinating when we talk about like Plato and Aristotle's debates and the synthesis that come from that, they repeat. We keep having the same debates, and people seem to forget about history. I know, like even with Oliver and I's generation, we know people, a good chunk of people who prescribe to these ideas that we just talked about Marx and Darwin, and they don't even seem to realize the history of those ideas. I mean, we've interacted with many who prescribe to Marxism. They may not say Marxism. Nowadays, we kind of say socialism or something else. But these ideas haven't worked before. But we forget about it.
Yeah.
And it's all kind of a escape from other ideas.
Yeah. And so if we don't know the history of it, we're doomed to repeat it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
We're doomed to repeat it. And I'm seeing it now more than ever. The ideas of two Germans and two French that are still here today. And when I hear like people like social media in your classrooms, you hear your kids, they're saying things that they think their favorite artist said or their favorite, hip hop artist said. Like when they talked about YOLO, like, dude, that's Albert Camus, It's like, what's your why? That's Friedrich Nietzsche, right? Yeah. All these ideas. And that's because we're heading back to that direction of wanting to throw out Christianity. Yeah. We're throwing out Christianity because Christianity is the biggest problem. And Christianity has been used and abused so many times. I'm going to say this. The political right is not Christianity.
Of course not.
The political right is not what Christianity is about. And so when people have a problem with Christianity, they use the political right ideologies.
Lump it together.
They lump it together.
They criticize the political right, claiming to be criticizing Christianity.
Right. Yeah. And then the left, they start using Bible verses and butchering Bible verses.
I've heard that a lot, yeah.
I'm like beside myself. That story no longer has, that story no longer has its meaning anymore because we've used a lot of Jesus's parables as a way to
really abused Jesus' parables.
We butchered those stories to try and promote leftist ideologies. And so for me, it's like, people are asking questions like, is Jesus left? Is Jesus right? If Jesus was here, would he be an activist? And all these things. And I think Jesus, did it brilliantly when he said, render to Caesar
That which is Caesar.
that which is Caesar's. Render to God which is God.
Should have brought a coin with us
Yeah.
for the visual component.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like God is neither left or right.
Well, it's interesting though that you say that, because you mentioned Jesus marching in like social activism and stuff like that. I've literally heard pastors' sermons where they've said Jesus would be marching in those riots, and blatantly using Jesus to push this agenda. I'm just like, Jesus did not have a political agenda. Now,
Yeah.
Jesus made political comments,
Mhm.
but they were a sidestep of his true agenda, which was his mission. And
Yeah.
we abuse him and use him
Yeah.
for our own agendas.
Yeah, and this is what we've got to be very careful about. See, the thing is that Jesus was about his Father's business.
Yes.
He unapologetically said that all throughout his ministry. If you read Luke chapter 12, in the middle of one of Jesus's teachings, a person speaks up. We don't even know the guy's name.
Yeah.
But he interrupts Jesus in the middle of his talk in Luke chapter 12. And he says to Jesus, I was like, Jesus, you sound like a good man, like a wise man.
Yeah.
Can you come and help me? Divide, the inheritance. There's like injustice, right? There's injustice that's happened in my life. And he says, can you come and fix this? And Jesus says, man, who made me
Yeah.
a judge for you? And that's a question. That's a very important question that we all have to ask ourselves.
Yeah.
Now, when he said man, the Greek word there is anthropos, meaning human. My Father told me to come reveal him.
Yeah.
You're telling me to come and sort this
Yeah.
situation out. And Jesus politely said no.
Yes. Politely.
He politely said no. Jesus was on a specific mission. And he would not be moved left or right, not even by a microscopic degree. Because for Jesus, he knew his purpose.
Yeah.
And the disciples also wanted him, along with many of his followers, to sit on the throne of David, literally.
Yeah.
They were going to force him politically
Yeah.
into that scene.
To be a ruler.
To be a ruler. The Zealots, they wanted their land back. They wanted their culture back. They wanted the Romans gone.
Yeah.
And Jesus wasn't a zealot.
No.
He didn't join in any of these political parties. To the point where when he was standing in front of Pontius Pilate said to him, where's your kingdom? He goes, it's not of this world.
Yeah.
Okay, problem solved.
Yeah.
As far as Pontius Pilate was concerned, he's not broken any laws because there's only one law, Roman law.
Yeah.
And if your laws and if your kingdom is not of this world, well, we can live in harmony, is really what Pontius Pilate was saying. He was like, you're not a threat to us. What Pontius Pilate didn't realize, though, which would become a realization shortly after he was gone,
Yeah.
that Christianity had such a powerful message.
Influential.
It was so influential that you didn't have to be a political activist in order to bring about the change, because the change was going to come not from the way that you conceptualized, the world.
Yeah.
Change was going to come here.
Yeah.
That was the change that Jesus was going to bring about.
Yeah.
And they weren't ready for him. They were not ready for what Jesus was going to bring to this world. And I even think even now, the change that Jesus can bring through the gospel, even now, would change even the most aggressive right or left.
Yeah.
We're not doing Christianity right still today by engaging the left with the right and engaging the right with the left. The way that Jesus did it is the way we all have to do it. I don't know where this quote is found. I do believe it is from Ellen White, where she says, to stop trying to correct all errors. Preach truth. Truth itself corrects error.
That's really good. Yeah.
Don't try and talk about, it's wrong. Gay marriage is wrong. Preach what marriage is.
Yeah. And that works itself out.
Yeah. It's like, preach what marriage is. I had a person once say to me, Rome, are you telling me that marriage can't be? And I said, I didn't say anything about that. I said what marriage is.
You defined what marriage is.
I defined what marriage is. But that, that hit them so hard that their definition of marriage didn't fall into what I had just taught according to what the scripture says.
And that's the key, because in that case, neither of you are defining what marriage is. In actuality, you're saying what the Bible defines marriage is. Because then people will attack you and say that it's your definition. It's like, it's not my definition at all. And that's that truth. Because it has to be objective.
Same thing about God. Same thing about God. We just focus on the character of God through the person of Jesus Christ. And that corrects any misunderstandings. And when people try and teach that Jesus was this and God was that, and you teach what the Bible says, and they come to you and say, oh, I noticed you didn't say this. Or, oh, yeah, that's because that's not found in the Bible at all. And then it's like, oh, okay, I'm pretty sure it is. And you'll be amazed at how many people would say, I'm pretty sure it is. And then they try and find a specific text that says that proves their ideas. And this is the biggest problem that we have, is that whenever we talk about Christianity today, we talk it to prove an idea. That's what I call speaking into the word. That's when the word is a dead word. But if you let the word of God speak to you, it's a living word. Because it'll make you question your beliefs. And it will also correct your beliefs when you let the word of God, speak to you.
All scripture is inspired by God and useful to tell us what is wrong in our lives and to teach us what is right.
That's right. And so that's why whenever people, talk about Karl Marx, Friedrich Nietzsche, the two Germans that have shaped the 21st century, and the two French, Jean-Paul Sartre and Michel Foucault. These are the minds that have shaped the world that we're in today. And what they're trying to do has already been proven in history before, and history will repeat itself. A world with no God will bring about, nihilism if we are not careful. And if we throw away Douglas Murray put it like this, and Douglas Murray, he's a British journalist. He says, be careful that you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, because the baby is holy. The baby is holy. And this is what Jordan Peterson and many others have tried to argue the case for. It's like, we have to think about this very carefully. Let's not jump too quickly and throw Christianity out the door because of the role that they played in helping us understand morals and ethics.
Isn't there's another illustration just popped in my head about, isn't it? It's like the fence, right? And you have the group of people who says, we got to tear the fence down, and they're all like on the riot. And you have the other group of people that says, first, you go tell me why the fence is there in the first place. Then we can talk about whether we're going to tear it down or not.
Exactly.
We have today, we just all want to tear the fence down. But we don't even really realize why it was there in the first place.
And that's right. We want to know because like the intention is long gone, right? And we forget. And if we remember what it served and what it was there for, we can correct where we went wrong,
Right.
rather than tearing the whole thing down. And that's what what Douglas Murray is referring to. It's like, let's look back at what Christianity really is, and that's what Jordan Peterson did when he went back to studying, Genesis.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that Jordan Peterson said that I agree with, and a lot of things that I disagree with.
Sure.
I just wanted to put that out there for anyone that's
of course.
that's listening, because I want people to understand that as a Christian, we promote Christian, ethics.
Mm-hmm.
We promote the person of Jesus Christ. We don't promote what other people put in place.
Of course.
But there are some things that a lot of people say out there that really is in alignment with what Jesus said. We're landing on, what I think is one of the biggest issues is, the misrepresentation
For sure.
of God by Christianity.
Yeah.
I stand with, many of the other atheists that have rejected the idea of Christianity. I do reject that idea of Christianity, the idea that that they have come to understand and come to know. I do disagree with the way in which, throughout our history, we have misrepresented Christianity. And I think that when Jesus is no longer the central focus, the gospel is no longer the focus. At the moment we start using Christianity for, to gain anything, like to win a political argument or to gain votes or and you use Christianity. I think that, we started doing that in the time of Constantine, and we haven't stopped doing that since. And so I guess that if we look at where the church is at today, many of our churches are divided over what Paul and Peter and John had done during their time more than 2,000 years ago. These were men that really stood for what Christianity was. Their stories are recorded in Scripture for us to model, and to also see that some of the challenges that they were confronted with will be challenges that we will be confronted with, and how did they deal with those challenges, and it would also help us to deal with the challenges that we're confronted with today. And so, I think that Christianity still has a voice, still has an opportunity to use that voice, to get people to think about, to think about ways in which we, number one, could treat each other, deal with each other. Number two, to really bring history into its proper place. As in, what I mean by that is, when we reflect on history in a way that would inform us about how to move forward. That's what history is all about, right? We look back to see, the goodness of God. That's what the Israelites were told to do. Look back into the history, to its history, to reflect on the goodness of God, so that they could depend on faith, in dealing with anything that comes in, before them. But also, if we look into, secular history as well, you look into secular history and you realize it hasn't been pretty for us as Christians. We haven't done things right, and it's an opportunity for us to get things right. Let's start having the right conversations. Let's start talking about how to deal with some of these things that we're confronted with in today's world. And I think that, what is it? I think it was just last week, my wife and I were watching the whole social dilemma. I don't know if you guys saw that documentary about the issues of social media.
Oh, yeah.
And the algorithms. And it's just, it's scary, the world that's in front of us, that we're in right now, and the future that we could have if we don't, take seriously, what the Word of God is saying about the soon return of Jesus and the importance of, spreading the gospel in the right way, the way that Jesus would do it. And that for me is my passion right now as a Christian, looking back at the history of Christianity. And I think to myself, like, we've done some things right and we've done some things wrong. And, how am I going to approach my ministry now, knowing that on one end, people have a distorted version of history. On the other end, people don't have a knowledge at all. So then,
what's worse, yeah,
right? So then, how do I share my faith in light of those facts? And so, history has really helped me to be better informed in how I, speak to, the people that I want to minister to. My ministry is more towards, those who've never heard Christianity before, or those who have a misunderstanding of what Christianity is all about. And so because I have that in mind, I look back in the history of Christianity so that when I'm having these conversations with people, I know what they know about who God is. And that's why, it's not an easy thing to say yes to when somebody says, do you believe in God? It's like you can't just say yes anymore, because who they think God is might not be the same as what you believe God to be. And that would cause a lot of problems. It's like, dude, hold on, I don't believe that God either, And so having that background would really help you in your ministry to be able to minister to people in the right way. It's like, I understand that. That's what the church did. And I want to admit to that also and acknowledge that as a Christian, that we didn't get things right. But I also want to talk to you about the problem with thinking that there is this utopian, right, that we're going to reach through, technology and education alone. D.L. Moody said if you just give somebody that was stealing nuts and bolts from a railway just education, he'll come back and steal the entire railway, So it's like, it's more than education, and I think that's what Christianity, does. If we were to remain in what Jesus taught us to do so.
It brings us that moral compass. Because like with the nuts and bolts and stealing a railway, you can teach him how to steal the railway, or you can teach him that it's wrong to steal the railway.
That's right. That's exactly right.
And I think we've learned a lot about how ideas have consequences and how we got to make sure we got the right ideas in the world today, for sure.
Yeah. I think that's it for us. Thanks so much for tuning in. Hopefully we'll catch you on the next one.
God bless.
God bless.
Thanks so much for tuning into this episode of Faith Talk.
Check us out on all of our socials. That'll be Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, and all the above. We also are on YouTube.
And subscribe to all our channels, YouTube, Apple, Spotify, things like that.
And be sure to check out our merch store. It not only supports us, but it helps us bring you higher quality content.
Yeah, and remember, we got a weekly word on Wednesday every week on Get This Wednesday.
And episodes come out first of the month.
Thanks so much for watching. Hopefully we'll catch you on the next one.
God bless.